It started with mud. Thick, red, metallic mud that clung to Jace Halden's boots like it held a personal grudge. Each step gave a slurp and a sigh, like the planet itself was disappointed he was still walking. He muttered something bitter about Elytra 4, galactic treaties, and the fact that dehydrated field rations never ever included chocolate anymore. The war had drained the planet just as it had drained the men and women who fought over it. Trees, twisted like arthritic fingers, reached toward a gray sky pulsing with electromagnetic static. Even the air tasted like it had given up. Chase was down to his last stim patch, and his internal HUD had stopped blinking hours ago, probably a victim of the EMP surge from the night before. His rifle, slung over his shoulder, was more ceremonial at this point than functional, like a security blanket with delusions of grandeur. He hadn't seen another human in 2 days. Enemy patrols had fallen quiet too, as if both sides were too exhausted to pretend they cared. He crested a ridge, expecting more scorched wasteland, but instead he saw a collapsed comms tower tangled in ivy and burnt cables. It rose like a dead god's crown from the brush. The structure was half swallowed by the earth, leaning drunkenly, but it was shelter. Sort of. He slid down the slope toward it, boots skidding in the slick terrain. At the base, between the shattered consoles and twisted panels, he noticed a faint flicker of movement. Jace froze, reached for the rifle. Realized again it was more useful as a walking stick. "Hello," he called, unsure why. Probably the early stages of dehydration-induced optimism. A pair of wide golden eyes peeked from behind a broken console. Then another, identical set, just to the left. Twin girls. Not human. Their skin was a soft, pale blue, their hair, improbably bright, like spun sunlight, hung in long braids. And their ears. They curved upward and back, tapering into elegant, almost regal points. Alien, yes. Dangerous? Hard to say. One was clutching a piece of broken circuitry like it was a weapon. The other just stared at him, lips pressed into a line. Jace held up his hands. "Okay, not here to shoot anyone. Honestly, I don't even think I could if I tried. This thing's more jammed than my comm signal." He gave the rifle a shake. It made a sad rattling sound. The girls exchanged a glance. The one with the circuitry tightened her grip. The other, slightly taller, maybe a few seconds older, if they were really twins, tilted her head. Jace could almost hear her thoughts. Is this human an idiot or just poorly constructed? He reached slowly into his chest pocket, half expecting one of them to shriek or vanish. Instead, they watched with predator-level intensity as he pulled out a small, slightly crumpled foil package. "Chocolate," he said, trying to sound diplomatic. "Earth delicacy. Rare. Sacred. Possibly cursed depending on the manufacturer." The twins didn't move. "I'm going to set it down right here," he added, placing the chocolate on a scorched panel. "My last piece. You're welcome. Or maybe not welcome. I mean, take it or don't. No pressure. This isn't a hostage negotiation." The taller twin stepped forward. The shorter one made a sharp sound. Possibly a warning, possibly her version of, "Don't touch that, it's probably poison." But the taller one crouched, reached out with delicate fingers, and picked up the foil. She sniffed it, looked at Jace, unwrapped the edge, took the tiniest nibble, and promptly burst into what could only be described as a joyful rant, half laughter, half song, flinging alien syllables into the air like confetti. She spun in a circle, then pointed at the chocolate, then at Jace, then at the sky. The shorter twin looked utterly betrayed, but also deeply curious. Jace blinked. Is that a good thing?" The shorter twin cautiously took the rest of the chocolate. She didn't eat it yet, just examined it as if trying to decode its molecular signature. The taller one was still singing, possibly composing a folk epic about candy. "Okay," Jace said, sinking to a sitting position against the base of the tower. "Well, glad someone enjoyed it. That was literally the last joy I had in this galaxy. You're welcome." The shorter twin took a careful bite, chewed. Her expression shifted from suspicion to stunned wonder. She sat down cross-legged, utterly transfixed by the flavor. Her sister flopped beside her, still humming. "I've seen peace treaties negotiated with more hostility than that," Jace muttered, pulling off one boot to dump out mud and what looked suspiciously like a baby eel. The taller twin turned toward him and spoke, very clearly, in their native tongue. The tone was curious. She pointed at him. He tapped his chest. "Jace! That's me! Jace! I'm human. It's not contagious." She tried to repeat it. "Shas!" He winced. "Close enough." Then she pointed to herself. "Era." The other one looked up. "Neva," she said with a mouthful of chocolate. "Well, Era and Neva," Jace said. "Pleasure to meet you. Sorry I didn't bring enough to share with your entire species." Era mimicked the word pleasure like it was an incantation. Then she offered him a flat, square piece of dried something. Possibly moss. Possibly very old meat. Jace took it, nibbled, grimaced. "Tastes like diplomacy." Era giggled. He leaned his head back against the metal and closed his eyes just for a second. The war was still out there. His squad was probably halfway across the valley or halfway underground. The sky would darken soon, bringing predators, human or otherwise. But for this moment, there was peace, and chocolate, and twins who laughed like light refracted through glass. He figured that wasn't the worst way to spend his last day alive. Jace woke to something poking his cheek, not the usual stabbing guilt of abandoned protocol or the haunting memory of orbital firestorms. No, this was much more literal. He cracked one eye open to find Neva standing over him, expression deadpan, tapping his face with a bent piece of conduit. When he didn't immediately respond, she gave him a second, more enthusiastic jab. "I'm awake," he grunted, batting the conduit away. "Barely. Stop it. That's not how we say good morning where I'm from. We usually start with coffee. Or screaming." Neva tilted her head, clearly not understanding, and handed him what looked like a chunk of fungus pressed into the shape of a cube. Era stood a few feet away, already chewing on one. She waved it encouragingly. Jace sniffed his piece and instantly regretted it. It smelled like moldy rain and hints of electrical fire. "Well," he muttered, "when in Rome." He took a bite, chewed once, and gagged so hard his internal diagnostics rebooted. "Is this food or a dare?" The twins giggled. Ira said something musical and incomprehensible, then tossed him a canteen of filtered water. It tasted like rust and hope. The sun, or what passed for it on Elytra 4, rose through the haze, casting long shadows across the twisted wreckage. The girls led Jace around to the backside of the comm tower, where a cracked hatch led down into what appeared to be a partially buried auxiliary pod. Inside, it was surprisingly intact, if you didn't count the flickering lights, the exposed wiring, or the very large alien skeleton in one corner, slumped against the wall like it had simply sat down and decided not to get up again. "Friend of yours?" Jace asked. Neva poked the skeleton with a stick. Nothing happened. "Good talk," Jace muttered. The pod had been partially retrofitted with scavenged parts. Blankets fashioned from environmental tarps, light sources cobbled together from plasma coils and battery packs, a storage crate turned into a cooking station. It was primitive, but clever. These girls weren't just surviving, they were adapting. Era pulled a loose panel from the wall and revealed a small stash of items. She beamed as she held up a rusted handheld projector. With a proud flourish, she activated it, projecting a flickering image onto the far wall. A fuzzy recording played. Alien figures dancing in slow motion beneath stars, with synth music that sounded like whale songs fed through a blender. Jace blinked. "That's either a music video or an interstellar mating ritual. Either way, I'm impressed." Era mimed dancing, flailing her arms like a malfunctioning drone. Neva joined in, hopping in circles while waving the bent conduit like a baton. Jace, caught between horror and amusement, stood up and gave the bear a shimmy. "You're welcome, Galaxy," he said, "for this cultural exchange." Later, while the girls scavenged more moss cubes from a storage container, Jace wandered to a corner of the pod and finally managed to get a read on his comms. The signal was weak, but he picked up a low-frequency chatter, mostly static but occasionally punctuated by words. "Recon unit, quadrant 6, possible civilian." It wasn't good, It meant the patrols were circling closer, probably tracking his signal. He turned off the receiver and stared at the rust-streaked floor. Ira approached quietly and crouched beside him. She held up something, a necklace strung together with wires and one of his lost jacket buttons. She placed it around his neck solemnly. "For me?" he asked. "Is this a friendship bracelet or a declaration of war?" She said something softly. It sounded beautiful, possibly dangerous, but she smiled, so he smiled back. They spent the next hour sorting the salvage pile together. Jace found a cracked holopad with a working translation matrix, limited but better than charades. He pointed to himself. "Jace," Era touched her chest. "Ira." Neva snorted and added something. The holopad translated it roughly. "Sister." "Better." "Modest," Jace said. He tapped the pad, trying different combinations until he managed. "Where are parents?" The girl's expression shifted. Era looked away. Neva sat down and fiddled with the conduit, quieter than usual. Jace didn't push. The silence said enough. He understood the way war erased people without ceremony. Sometimes entire cities disappeared, and all you had left was a trinket or a memory or a half-finished meal on a scorched table. He reached into his pack, fished out his last emergency protein ration, beef-flavored, allegedly, and split it 3 ways. The girls chewed cautiously. "See," he said, "now you know the true taste of regret." Neva spat hers out. Era made a heroic attempt, then swallowed with a grimace and gave him a thumbs up. Probably a cultural misunderstanding, but he appreciated the effort. Night fell quickly on Elytra 4. The 3 of them sat in the pod, surrounded by jury-rigged lights and distant static. Jace tried telling them stories, miming ridiculous tales of Earth, a dog that could skateboard, a man who married his robot vacuum, and an entire continent that still didn't believe in climate control. They didn't get the words, but they laughed at the faces he made. Neva tried to tell a joke in her language. It involved miming a lizard and what Jace hoped was a musical instrument. Era clapped at the punchline. He laughed because their laughter was better than any joke he knew. Eventually, the girls curled up on their makeshift bedrolls. Era mumbled something in her sleep, one hand still holding the foil wrapper from the chocolate. Jace sat watch with the rifle across his lap, knowing full well it wouldn't help. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe recon teams, maybe worse. But for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel completely alone. Somehow, in a war where entire species had stopped seeing each other as people, he had shared laughter, a terrible protein bar, and a story about a dog on wheels. And chocolate. Always start with chocolate. Jace woke to the familiar hum of malfunctioning circuitry and the less familiar sensation of something drooling on his boot. He opened one eye. Era had rolled off her bedding in the night and was now curled up beside his leg, snoring softly. Neva was perched upside down on a crate like a strange blue bat, one ear twitching as she dreamed. He carefully shifted, freeing his leg, and stretched. Outside the pod, the pale green light of Elytra 4 filtered through cracks in the hull, bathing everything in a dreamlike glow. He winced as he checked the diagnostics on his arm panel. Battery levels. Low. Water filtration, unstable. Mood, somewhere between slightly caffeinated and doomed but pretending otherwise. He stepped outside, scanning the horizon. A flock of crescent-winged avians screamed overhead like someone had thrown a blender into a tornado. The morning breeze carried the familiar scent of scorched soil and faint ozone. Either a storm brewing or an orbital weapon test. Again. Neva emerged behind him, yawning and dragging the bent conduit she'd apparently adopted as a weapon, pet, or fashion statement. She pointed toward the horizon and muttered something in her language. Jace activated the holopad, fiddled with the interface, and got Skyhole. He squinted. In the far distance, something shimmered. A ripple in the clouds, like the atmosphere was trying to unzip itself. "Is it always like that here?" he asked. Neva shrugged, then added, "Bad hole." "Eat ship." He nodded slowly. "Cool. So we just won't go near the atmospheric mouth of doom?" "Good talk." Ira joined them, holding up a rusted panel with a drawing etched into it. Stick figures, one clearly him with his comically exaggerated beard stubble, Another was Neva with enormous ears, and the last was Aera, smiling under a giant sun. You flatter me, Jace said. Also, why am I shorter than both of you? She tapped her own chest and then his drawing, then crossed their stick hands together. Oh, we're a team now. Well, that's official. Should we get matching tattoos or just skip straight to the awkward family dinners? They spent the morning scouring a broken skimmer craft, half buried in the dust. Jace pried open a panel to reveal a half-functional energy cell, which promptly shocked him. He reeled backward, arms flailing. Science, he wheezed, smoke curling from his fingers. Eru applauded. Neva mimicked his flailing fall with theatrical flair, then poked him in the side. Okay, he muttered. I get it. I'm comedy gold. The twins scavenged wiring and crystalline filters, while Jace managed to repair one of his boots with a bit of polymer foam and wishful thinking. He stared at the broken pieces of the skimmer. The pilot's seat charred, control nodes fused. Someone had crashed hard, and they hadn't walked away. By midday, they returned to the pod. Era pulled out what looked like an ancient entertainment device, surprisingly intact. She powered it on, and to Jace's surprise, it worked. Holograms projected midair. Bright, stylized characters with absurdly large eyes and louder voices, shouting at each other in what might have been a soap opera or a cooking competition. Maybe both. They watched in silence for a while, utterly absorbed. Neva pointed dramatically every time a character yelled. Era mimed cooking, tossing invisible ingredients into an invisible pot. Jace, not to be outdone, created an impromptu chef persona. Today, we're preparing a delightful fusion cuisine, he narrated, stirring the air. First, take your despair, marinate it in exhaustion, then garnish with a light dusting of existential dread. Voila! Field rations a la soldier. The girls burst into laughter. Era pretended to faint from the flavor. Later, while the twins napped, Jace snuck a peek at his comm unit. He calibrated the signal, reached further into the ether. Static hissed for long minutes until a voice broke through. Sharp, clipped, familiar. Lieutenant Voss, report location, hostile territory, extraction pending. Jace hesitated. His thumb hovered over the transmitter. He looked back at the pod, at the girls asleep in a tangle of blankets and scavenged pillows, their faces peaceful. The message repeated. He turned off the comm. The silence returned, heavy and comforting. As night fell, Neva insisted they follow her to a secret place. Jace followed the twins through a winding path of broken hulls and up a rocky incline. At the top, they reached a strange structure, an old observation deck, mostly intact. Panels lined the edge, cracked but stable. Era activated a console, and suddenly the ceiling flickered to life. A holographic dome lit up, projecting a perfect view of the stars above, even the ones obscured by atmosphere. The girls sat cross-legged, staring up. Jace joined them. Above, constellations glimmered, alien and beautiful. One of them looked like a squid doing yoga. Probably wasn't, but that was his story. Neva traced one with her finger, then turned to him. She tapped his chest, then pointed to the stars. You think I come from there? He asked. She nodded. Then she pointed to herself, into a different cluster. Well, he said, that's a long-distance friendship if I ever saw one. Era leaned her head on his shoulder. Jace tensed slightly, then relaxed. Her warmth was strange, cooler than human, but comforting in its own way. Maybe someday, he said softly, we'll get to visit those stars. Just not in a burning drop pod, yeah? Neva reached into her satchel and handed him something. He turned it over in his hands. It was his chocolate wrapper, cleaned, smoothed out, folded into the shape of a flower. He stared at it, then laughed. It was ridiculous and perfect. You two, he said, are going to get me court-martialed for being soft. Era whispered a word he didn't know, but it sounded like thanks. Jace leaned back against the cracked console, surrounded by starlight and silence. And for the first time since the war began, he let himself hope. Just the next morning, the starlight dome flickered out with a quiet fizzle as Era tapped the panel again, disappointed when it sparked and hissed at her like an offended toaster. Neva was already halfway down the ridge, tugging Jace's sleeve with the enthusiasm of someone who had either discovered an ancient treasure trove or a really big bug. He trudged after her, still half asleep and chewing on something vaguely bar-shaped and only marginally edible. "Is it weird I miss the taste of army rations?" he muttered. At least they were honest about being terrible. Neva led them down a jagged path toward what looked like a sunken hatch wedged between two slabs of collapsed stone. Faded glyphs marked the door, symbols like spirals, jagged lines, and what Jace swore looked like an alien doing jazz hands. "Ancient Elytran vault?" he guessed. Neva grinned and gave him a thumbs up. Era poked the panel beside the door, which lit up green and hissed open like it had just woken from a 1,000-year nap and wasn't thrilled about it. Inside, the air was surprisingly dry and cool, filled with the faint scent of old circuits and something spicy. Possibly moss. They stepped inside, lights flickering on ahead of them with a soft hum, revealing a narrow hallway lined with crystalline panels. Holograms flickered to life, images of Elytran engineers, blue-skinned with long ears like the twins, wearing elegant robes and arguing about what seemed to be architecture or possibly lunch preferences. Era stopped and stared at one of the recordings. Her ears twitched. She touched her chest, then pointed at one of the engineers. "Relative?" Jace asked. She nodded slowly. The hologram flickered, then glitched into a loop of the engineer, dramatically pointing at a blueprint. "I think he's saying, 'This building needs more flair,'" Jace guessed. They moved deeper into the vault, passing rows of inert machines. Neva pressed a button on one, and it shuddered to life, projecting a 3D map of the planet. Tiny glowing dots pulsed across its surface, some steady, some blinking erratically. Jace pointed to a cluster of dots. "Military outposts," he said. "Ours." He zoomed in. One dot flashed red near their location. "That's not great." Red usually means problem or hot sauce, but in this case probably more like impending doom. Neva tapped a different icon, and a soft hum vibrated through the chamber. A panel in the wall slid open, revealing sleek rods stacked neatly, weapons, Elytran design. Lightweight, elegantly shaped, and humming with dormant energy. Era picked one up, twirled it like a baton, then aimed it at Jace with a playful beep. "Do I get one?" he asked. She handed him a small device instead, shaped like a tuning fork mated with a flashlight. He turned it on and promptly blinded himself. "Excellent. I've always wanted to weaponize embarrassment." They continued deeper until they reached a chamber that opened like a bloom. The ceiling rose into a crystalline dome, and at its center stood a device, a console surrounded by orbiting rings, each inscribed with symbols and glowing faintly. Jace approached it cautiously. The console lit up beneath his hand, scanning him. Wait, I'm not authorized. I'm barely qualified to use a coffee machine." Too late. The rings spun faster, generating a hum that rose in pitch. Then a projection burst from the core, an image of a vast machine buried under Elytra 4's surface. Its spires reached toward the crust, and its heart pulsed with rhythmic light. "What in the name of gravity boots is that?" Era stared in awe. Neva muttered something, and the translation on Jace's wrist buzzed. "World engine." He blinked. "Okay, that's not ominous at all." The projection shifted to show the machine breaking apart. Flames, destruction, shock waves across the land. The twins looked away. Jace swallowed hard. "So this is the part where I make a heroic speech about stopping this from happening," he said. "I should warn you, I failed theater class." Era touched the console. It dimmed. They made their way out of the vault in silence. Outside, the horizon burned red with sunset, or possibly fire. Jace checked his comm again. Messages, multiple. One from command. "Confirmed enemy energy source detected. Reinforcements en route. Engage on site." He stared at the words. Era and Naiva stood beside him. The light caught their faces, their long ears glowing faintly like bioluminescent sails. They watched him, not speaking, not smiling. He closed the comm. Back at the pod, Jace took inventory. Supplies, thin. Energy cells, critical. Hope, rapidly depleting. Morale, surprisingly intact. "I say we fix the old skimmer," he announced. Neva blinked. Era tilted her head. You heard me. We patch that bucket of bolts and fly it straight to that world engine thing. Then we do something heroic. Press buttons, pull wires, shout dramatic things. I don't know, we wing it. Neva saluted with her mock weapon. Era gave a thumbs up and mimed crashing gloriously. They worked into the night. Jace reconfigured the energy cell, Era rewired the guidance system using a salvaged food heater, and Neva installed a mysterious component labeled "Do Not Touch." Naturally, she touched it immediately. The skimmer sputtered to life at dawn, hovering 3 feet off the ground and vibrating like it had indigestion. Beautiful, Jace said, like a space-capable shopping cart. They loaded supplies. Neva secured the weapons. Era brought the chocolate wrapper flower and placed it in a makeshift cockpit shrine. Jace climbed in, strapped himself down, and looked at his companions. You two ready to rewrite the war? Era grinned. Neva cracked her knuckles. Great. Let's fly this glorified hairdryer into history. The skimmer shuddered, lifted, and lurched into the sky like a drunk dragonfly. Jace whooped. The girls laughed, and the world engine pulsed in the distance, waiting. When the skimmer coughed, wheezed, then jerked sideways like it had been slapped by an invisible hand, Jace clung to the controls with the grim determination of a man who just realized the emergency eject button was labeled in an alien dialect that might have translated to "Congratulations." Era and Neva sat behind him, strapped in with scavenged belts and one suspiciously stretchy vine, completely unbothered. Neva munched on a crunchy leaf snack that smelled like burnt rubber, while Era quietly adjusted the trajectory display with the serene focus of someone solving a puzzle box. The world engine loomed ahead, its towering spires clawing at the sky. It pulsed beneath the planet's crust, a throb of deep mechanical life, like the heartbeat of something ancient and not entirely happy to be awake. The skimmer's sensors began to panic, lights flashing, alarms blaring, a robotic voice repeatedly suggesting they immediately consult a qualified technician. Jace slapped the console. The voice died with a resigned beep. They cleared the final ridge, wind howling around them, and there it was, the access point. A massive platform of black stone, partially collapsed, flanked by broken pylons and tangled roots. The center housed a glowing terminal, shaped like a throne, and a sundial had a weirdly attractive baby. Jace brought the skimmer down with a lurch, earning a chorus of groans from the vehicle's abused frame. Okay, he said, unstrapping. Game plan. We get in, we shut it down, we maybe don't explode. Thoughts? Era handed him a device, a cylindrical tool with 2 prongs and a red button. He looked at it, looked at her, and raised an eyebrow. You're giving me a universal override key shaped like a barbecue fork. I feel incredibly confident. They approached the terminal. Neva touched a glyph. The ground trembled. Something shifted below, deep and guttural, like the planet had just cleared its throat. The central interface rose from the floor, tall and imposing. Jace stepped up, raised the override key, and paused. He turned to the twins. You two sure about this? Once I press this, everything changes. Probably. Era nodded. Neva grinned. Boom, she said helpfully. He activated the key. The interface pulsed, scanned him again, then opened like a blooming flower made of circuits and alien math. Inside the core, a sphere of swirling energy, suspended in anti-gravity, humming with potential, and a faint musical note that suspiciously resembled elevator music. Jace stepped closer, overridden by instincts he didn't know he had. The sphere responded, threads of light reaching toward him, syncing with his memories. Faces flashed. His unit, gone. His home, distant. The chocolate he gave away. The sphere pulsed. A motion-encoded catalyst, he muttered. Of course. Classic. He reached out. The sphere accepted him. Energy surged through the platform. The spires outside shimmered, then began to retract, folding in on themselves like reversing time. Systems across the planet went dormant. The tremors stilled. The world engine shut down. Era and Neva whooped, laughing as a harmless static wave puffed their hair into chaos. Jace staggered back, blinking, dizzy. You okay? Era asked, tugging his sleeve. I just shut down an ancient alien superweapon with a chocolate-powered override key and a barbecue fork, he said. So yeah, I'm good. They returned to the surface where the air felt different, lighter somehow. Birds circled overhead. Real birds. Not the mechanical spy kind. Jace collapsed on the skimmer's hood. Era sat beside him, mimicking his relaxed posture. Neva climbed onto the roof and declared herself queen of the rusty sky chariot. A few hours later, a human dropship appeared, descending in a swirl of dust. Jace stood as it landed, unsure of what to expect. A hatch opened, and a stern officer stepped out, flanked by soldiers. "You're Sergeant Voss?" the officer asked. "Last I checked. We got your signal. We've been trying to track that engine for months. What happened?" Jace gestured to the twins. "Diplomatic outreach," he said. "Also snacks." The officer stared. Era waved. Neva offered a leaf. Later, as they flew away, Jace sat between the twins, who had been offered seats and more rations than they knew what to do with. Era was dissecting a juice pouch with surgical precision. Neva was writing something in her journal, something that glowed faintly. He looked out the window. The engine was gone, the land peaceful, and inside him, something had changed too. Not just a soldier anymore, not just a survivor. He'd built something. Bridges, not bunkers. "So," he said, nudging Era, "do your people do medals?" She looked at him, confused. "Recognition? Awards?" he prompted. She mimed placing something on his head, then made a raspberry noise. "Perfect," he grinned. "I've always wanted the official fool who shared chocolate with aliens and lived badge." The twins laughed. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the ship carry them home. Chapter